Hi, sweethearts. It's April 18th, 2017, and I really enjoyed reading to my two girls whenever they were growing up, Caitlin and Kennedy, and I still enjoy reading to them when they give me the opportunity. Don't know if I'll ever meet you, but I'd like the opportunity to read one of their favorite books to you, even though it's just on video. But hopefully you'll enjoy it. And um, even though I've never met you, I love you very much. I hope you're doing great, and things are well in the world. I do. The book I'm going to read is called The Penderwicks by Jean Birdsall. It's a story of four sisters, their dad, their dog, and a number of adventures that they go on. And it's been a favorite book and story series of my two girls for a long time. And I'd like to read it to you. It's not a very long book. This is the first one in the series. It's a summer tale of four sisters, two rabbits, and a very interesting boy. Chapter 1 is called A Boy at the Window. I'm just going to start reading. For a long time after that summer, the four Penderwick sisters still talked of Arundel. Fate drove us there, Jane would say. No, it was the greedy landlord who sold our vacation house on Cape Cod, someone else would say, probably Skye. Who knew which was right, but it was true that the beach house they usually rented had been sold at the last minute, and the Penderwicks were suddenly without summer plans. Mr. Penderwick called everyone... Mr. Penderwick called everywhere, sorry about that, but Cape Cod was booked solid, and his daughters were starting to think they would be spending their whole vacation at home in Cameron, Massachusetts. Not that they didn't love Cameron, but what's a summer trip without going somewhere special? Then, out of the blue, Mr. Penderwick heard through a friend of a friend about a college in the Berkshire Mountains. From what he was told, it had plenty of bedrooms, a big fenced-in pen for a dog, perfect for big, black, clumsy, lovable hound Penderwick. And this place was available to be rented for 3 weeks in August. Mr. Penderwick snatched it up sight unseen. He didn't know what he was getting us into, Batty would say. Rosalind always said, it's too bad Mommy never saw Arundel. She would have loved the gardens. And Jane, she would say, there are much better gardens in heaven. And Mommy will never have to bump into Mrs. Tifton in heaven. Skye added that to make her sisters laugh. And laugh they would, and the talk would move on to other things until the next time someone remembered Arundel. But all that is in the future. When our story begins, Batty is still only 4 years old. Rosalind is 12, Skye is 11, and Jane is 10. They are in their car with Mr. Penderwick, oh my gosh, and their beloved hound. The family was on the way to Arundel, and unfortunately, they've gotten lost. It's Batty's fault, said Skye. It is not, said Batty. Of course it is, said Skye. We wouldn't be lost if Hound hadn't eaten the map, and Hound wouldn't have eaten the map if you had not hidden your sandwich inside the map. Well, maybe it's fate that Hound ate the map. Maybe we'll discover something wonderful while we're lost, said Jane. Well, we will discover that when I'm in the back seat for too long with my younger sisters, I go insane and murder them, said Skye. Steady now, troops, said Mr. Penderwick. Rosalind, how about a game? Rosalind thought. Then she said, let's do I went to the zoo and I saw. I went to the zoo and I saw an anteater. Jane? Jane thought. Then she said, I went to the zoo and I saw an anteater and a buffalo. Batty was seated between Jane and Skye, so it was her turn next. I went to the zoo and I saw an anteater, a buffalo, and a kangaroo. Kangaroo, said Skye. It starts with a K, not a C. It does not. It starts with a C, like cat, said Batty. Just take your turn, Skye, said Rosalind. There's no point in playing if we don't do it right. Now Rosalind, who was sitting in the front seat with Mr. Penderwick, turned around and gave Skye her oldest sister glare. It wouldn't do much, Rosalind knew. After all, Skye was only 1 year younger than she was, but it might quiet her long enough for Rosalind to concentrate on where they were going. They really were badly lost. This trip should have taken about an hour and a half, and already they'd been on the road for well over 3 hours. Rosalind looked over at her father in the driver's seat. His glasses were slipping down his nose, and he was humming his favorite Beethoven symphony, the one about spring. Rosalind knew this meant he was thinking about plants. Their father was a professor of botany. Let me back up and rephrase that. Rosalind knew this meant he was thinking about plants. He was a professor of botany. He was thinking about plants instead of about driving. Daddy, she said, what do you remember about the map? Well, he said, we're supposed to go past a little town called Framley, then make a few turns and look for number 11 Stafford Street. Well, didn't we see Framley a while ago? And look, she said, pointing out the window. We've been past those cows before. I just know it. Ah, yes. Good eye, Rosie, he said. But weren't we going in the other direction the last time? Maybe this way will do the trick. No, because all we saw along here were more cow fields, remember? Oh, yes, Mr. Penderwick said. He stopped the car, he turned it around, and began going back the other way. We need to find someone who can give us directions, said Rosalind. We need to find a helicopter that can airlift us out of here, said Skye, and keep your stupid wings to yourself. She was talking to Batty, who, as always, was wearing her beloved orange and black butterfly wings. They are not stupid, said Batty. Woof, said Hound from his place among the boxes and suitcases in the very back of the car. He took Batty's side in every discussion. Lost and quite weary, the brave explorers and their faithful beast argued among themselves. Only Sabrina Starr remained calm, said Jane. Sabrina Starr was the heroine of the books that Jane had been writing. Sabrina Starr rescued things. In the first book, she rescued a cricket. Then came Sabrina Starr rescues a baby sparrow, followed by Sabrina Starr rescues a turtle, and her most recent Sabrina Starr rescues a groundhog. Rosalind knew that Jane was looking for ideas on what Sabrina Starr could rescue next. Skye had suggested a man-eating crocodile who would devour the heroine and put an end to the series finally, but the rest of the family had shouted their disapproval. They enjoyed Jane's books. Out of the back seat came a loud oomph. Rosalind glanced around to make sure violence hadn't broken out, but it was only Batty struggling with her car seat. She was trying to twist herself backward to see Hound. Jane was jotting in her favorite blue notebook, so they were both all right. But Skye was blowing out her cheeks and imitating a fish, which meant she was even more bored than Rosalind had feared. They'd better find this cottage soon. Then Rosalind spotted the truck, pulled over by the side of the road. Stop, Daddy. Maybe we can get directions. Mr. Penderwick pulled over and Rosalind got out of the car. She now saw the truck had a sign painted in large letters on each of its doors that said tomatoes. Next to the truck was a wooden table piled high with fat red tomatoes, and behind the table an old man wearing worn blue jeans and a green shirt with Harry's Tomatoes embroidered across the pocket. Tomatoes, he asked. Ask if they're magic tomatoes, Rosalind heard. Out of the corner of her eye she saw Skye hauling Jane back in through the car window. My younger sisters, said Rosalind apologetically to the old man. He laughed. I had 6 of them myself. For a moment Rosalind tried to imagine having 6 younger sisters, but she kept coming up with each of her sisters turned into twins. She shuddered and said, your tomatoes look delicious, but what I really need are directions. We're looking for number 11 Stafford Street." The man sat up and said, "Arundel?" "Well, I don't know about any Arundels," she said, "but we're supposed to be renting that cottage at that address." "Well, that's Arundel," the man said. "Mrs. Tifton's place. Beautiful woman. Snooty as all get out, though. Oh, dear." "But you'll be fine," he said. "There are a couple of nice surprises over there. You're going to have to keep that blonde one under control, though," he said, nodding towards the car, where Skye and Jane were now leaning out of the window together, listening. Muffled complaints could be heard from Batty, who was being squished. "Why me?" called Skye. The man winked at Rosalind. "I can always spot the troublemakers. I was one myself. Now, tell your dad to go down this road just a little ways. Take the very first left, then a quick right, and then look for number 11. "Thank you," said Rosalind, very relieved, and turned to go. "Hold on a minute." He plopped half a dozen of his best tomatoes into a paper bag. "Why don't you take these as a housewarming gift?" "Oh, I couldn't possibly," said Rosalind. "Sure you can. Tell your dad they're a present from Harry." He handed Rosalind the bag. "And one last thing, young lady. You and your sisters better stay clear of Mrs. Tifton's gardens. She's touchy about those gardens, but you do enjoy those tomatoes now." Rosalind got back into the car with her bag full of tomatoes. "Did you hear him? Straight, then left, then right, then look for number 11. Mr. Penderwicks started up the car. "What's this Arundel he was talking about?" said Skye. "And who's Mrs. Tifton?" said Jane. "Hal needs to go to the bathroom," said Batty. "Soon, honey," said Rosalind. "Daddy, here. Go..." Wait, I think I turned 2 pages. Okay. "Here, Daddy. Here's where we turn left." A few moments later, they were turning onto Stafford Street, and then suddenly Mr. Penderwick stopped the car in the middle of the road, and everyone stared in amazement. What had the family expected from a rental cottage? A cozy little tumble-down house with a few pots of geraniums in the front yard, possibly? Even Harry the Tomato Man's news hadn't changed that. If anyone had thought about it at all, they had figured snooty Mrs. Tifton lived in a cottage next to theirs and grew vegetables in carefully guarded garden plots. That is not what they saw. What they saw were 2 tall, elegant stone pillars, with number 11 carved across one and Arundel across the other. Beyond the pillars was a lane winding off into the distance, with double rows of tall pillars on each side, with poplars growing as well. And past the poplars was a beautifully tended lawn dotted with graceful trees. There was no house in sight. "Holy bananas," said Skye. "Cottages do not have front yards like this," said Rosalind. "Daddy, are you sure you remember the right address?" "I'm pretty sure," said Mr. Penderwick. He turned the car and started slowly down the lane, which wandered on until the Penderwicks thought they would never reach the end. But finally there was one last curve, the poplar trees came to an end, and Rosalind's fears were realized. "Daddy, that's not a cottage." "No, I agree, sweetheart. That is a mansion." And so it was. A huge mansion, crouching in the middle of formal gardens. Built from gray stone, it was covered with towers, balconies, terraces, and turrets. They jutted out every which way, and the gardens! There were fountains, flowering hedges, marble statues, and that was just in the part the Penderwicks could see from the lane. The exhausted travelers saw before them a dwelling fit for kings. "Care Paravel, El Dorado, Camelot," said Jane. "Too bad we're not kings," said Skye. "Well, we're still lost," said Rosalind, who was still discouraged. "Buck up, Rosie," said Mr. Penderwick. "Here comes someone. Surely we can ask them." A tall teenage boy, pushing a wheelbarrow, had appeared from behind a large statue of Cupid and Venus. Mr. Penderwick rolled down his car window, but before he could call out to the boy, a familiar gagging noise came from the back seat of the car. "Hound's going to barf!" screamed Batty. The sisters knew the drill too well. In a flash, they flew out and around to the back of the car and dragged poor Hound over to the side of the lane. He threw up all over Jane's sneakers. "Oh, Hound, how could you?" moaned Jane, looking down at what had been her nice yellow high tops. But Hound had already wandered off to inspect some intriguing-looking bush. "This isn't as bad as the time he ate pizza out of the garbage can," said Skye. Batty crouched down to inspect the mess. "There's the map," she said, pointing to what Hound had just done. "Oh," said Rosalind, "don't touch it. And Jane, stop shaking your sneakers. You're slinging it all around. Stand still, everyone, until I get back." She ran over to the car to try to find some paper towels. The teenager with the wheelbarrow had come over to the driveway, and Mr. Penderwick had gotten out of the car and was talking to him. "I see there's some Linea borealis here along the drive. Odd place for it, but I'm particularly interested in Cyprinium artrium." Those are scientific names for plants if you're an arborist like Mr. Or not an arborist, that's a tree person, but if you're into plants like Mr. Penderwick. Anyway, he's particularly interested in these particular plants. Okay, so getting back to the story. Rosalind ducked her head into the back of the car and rooted around among the luggage. Her father was talking in Latin about plants, which meant he was happy. She hoped he remembered to ask the boy about directions also. He looked nice, the boy, 18 or maybe 19 years old, with light brown hair sticking out from under a Red Sox baseball cap. Rosalind peered around the car and sneaked a look at the boy's hands. Her best friend, Anna, always said that you could tell a lot about people from their hands. The boy was wearing gardening gloves. The paper towels finally were located behind Mr. Penderwick's computer and under a soccer ball. Rosalind grabbed a handful of paper towels and rushed back to her sisters. Jane and Skye were piling leaves on top of Hound's barf. "Remember when he ate that lemon cream pie off the Geiger's picnic table? He really puked that time," said Skye. "What about the time he stole a whole meatloaf out of the refrigerator? He was sick for 2 days," said Jane. "Hush," said Rosalind, wiping Jane's sneakers as clean as she could. Mr. Penderwick and the boy started walking towards them. "Girls," said Mr. Penderwick, "let me introduce you to this young man. His name is Cagney." "Hi," said Cagney, with a big smile. "Hi," said Cagney, with a big smile. He slipped off his gloves and stuck them in his jeans pocket. Rosalind looked as hard as she could at his hands, but they were just regular old hands to her. She wished Anna were here to give a better diagnosis. "Cagney, these 4 are my pride and joy. The one with the blonde hair, she is my second daughter, Skye." "Blue sky, blue eyes," said Skye, opening wide her blue eyes to demonstrate. "That's how you can remember which one she is," said Jane. "Blue eyes and straight blonde hair. The rest of us have identical brown eyes and dark curly hair. People get me and Rosalind mixed up all the time." "They do not. I'm much taller than you are," said Rosalind, painfully aware that not only was she holding a handful of vomity paper towels, but she was wearing her shirt with Wildwood Elementary School across the front. Oh, why had she worn that shirt? She didn't want people to think she was still in elementary school. She was going to start 7th grade in September. "Yes, well, the tall one is Rosalind, my oldest. The short one is Jane, and—" Mr. Penderwick looked around him. "Over there," said Jane, pointing to the orange and black wings sticking out from behind the tree. "Ah, yes, that's Batty. She's the shy one. Now, troops, good news. This is the right place, after all. Cagney is the gardener here at Arundel Hall, and that's what this mansion is called. He's been expecting us. Our cottage is at the back of the estate grounds." "It used to be a guest cottage for the main house," said Cagney, "back in the days when General and Mrs. Framley were alive. It's quieter here now with Mrs. Tifton in charge." "Mrs. Tifton!" exclaimed Jane, and would have said more if Rosalind had not just dug an elbow into her ribs. "Okay, girls, well, let's be off," said Mr. Penderwick. "And Cagney, let's have that talk about the native flora sometime soon." "Yes, I'd like that," said Cagney. "Now, to get to the cottage, take the driveway up there on the left and follow it past the carriage house and into the formal gardens. You'll see the sunken garden to your left and the Greek pavilion to the right, and then you'll drive through the boundary hedge. The cottage is a few hundred more yards along. It's yellow, you can't miss it, and the key is under the mat. Rosalind, round up Batty. Rosalind rounded up Batty. Skye fetched Hound, and soon everyone was in the car ready to go, except for Jane. She was standing in the driveway, staring up at Arundel Hall. Rosalind leaned out the window. "Jane, come on!" Jane reluctantly turned away from the mansion. "I thought I saw a boy in one of the windows up there. He was looking down at us." Skye leaned across Batty, flattening her into the seat, and looked out Jane's window, trying to catch a glimpse. "Where?" she said. "Up there," said Jane, pointing. "Top row, to the right." "No one's there now," said Skye. "Get off me," said Batty. Skye settled back down into her own seat. "You must have imagined him, Jane." "Maybe. I don't think so," said Jane, "but whether I did or not, he's given me a pretty good idea." Chapter 2, A Tunnel Through the Hedge. And we'll save Chapter 2 for another day. Love you. Bye.